everyone. I'm going to talk today about market research and why Kitfox does it and how Kitfox does it. So the first thing to understand is that market research isn't about deciding what game to make. To me, for Kitfox, we do market research to understand how our games fit in the world, who might like it, and what risks we're taking when we decide to do a project. When we're making different kinds of game ideas, we want to know who will buy it, who might buy it, and why, and also how much money can we spend on it in a realistic way and expect to make that money back in our lifetimes. So today I'm going to use Lucifer Within Us as our main example. It's a game that we started working on in 2017. It's a mystery solving game where you play a digital exorcist who solves a series of murders, and in doing so finds out who has been possessed by AI demons. Now, in 2017, we weren't really sure who was going to play it exactly. We just knew that we wanted to make a game like this. It was a dream game for the creator, Jong-Woo Kim, who had previously made The Shrouded Isle. And at the time, we actually thought it was going to be more of a normal detective science fiction game. So in 2017, we looked around and we were like, okay, oh, it's getting spicy, hold on. There we go, okay. So that's our announced trailer coming October 15th. But anyway, this isn't actually an ad for Lucifer Within Us. Right, so in 2017, we looked around and we were like, okay, how many people want to play a murder mystery game? And that's usually the first step. And the real question we were asking ourselves is how much money can we spend on this game? How much time? How many people? Assuming that it, does like a medium well amount. It performs medium well in the mystery genre. If it finds its audience, can we make back our money or expect to? And what risks are we taking before we get on board with this? So while Jong-Woo was prototyping, because it's just, he's one guy and we knew we could spend a couple months looking at the gameplay and making sure the gameplay worked, I went and I did market research. So the first thing I did was I figured out what are the major categories that people might think about this game in. At the time, it was called Chronocyte, by the way, because you were seeing through time with the different testimonies. So the first category is mystery solving, murder mysteries. That's the core key thing that people seem to say, I like this kind of game. Okay, so what are those kinds of games? And the next category was setting. Now, at that time, like I said, it wasn't about demons or anything to do with the supernatural or exorcism. It was more about detectives. And so that was the other thing that I looked at. And here's the spreadsheet that I made at the time. You can see a mystery noir. You can see I sort of ended up with a blank after that, and adventure was the next thing. We knew it was going to be dark, so we looked at some dark management games. And then I started thinking about, and then when Jong-Woo mentioned maybe we'd want to do some cultish stuff, then I looked into some cults / weird horror. But that's the first step in market research, is what are the major categories of ways people will think about finding your game or talking about your game. And so once you found those, so mystery, for example, now back in 2017, I didn't quite trust everything to do with Steam Spy, but I just went on Steam because that was going to be our major platform, and I would type in mystery. And there is a mystery tag, I believe. Let's look. Mystery. Yeah, there it is. So if I look for mystery, then I can actually remove that. Now I'm looking at all the mystery games, and they're sort of ordered by magical Steam algorithm ways. But I need to order it, or I need to restrict it more than that, because I don't think my game really has a chance of performing as well as Persona 4 Golden, for example. It doesn't matter that they're both mystery games. First of all, we're making a new intellectual property. It would be a new game with a new title no one's ever heard of before. We didn't know what the title was, but we knew it would be new. It's not going to be a sequel. It's not going to be a AAA advertising budget. So we need to limit it to indies as well, which by itself, indie is actually a fairly useless marketing tag, but it's useful for me when I'm doing market research because if most things that are indie are tagged, or indie-ish are tagged indie, then I can learn from it. Firewatch is a good example of something that maybe their budget was a bit higher than we can hope to spend, but that's okay. They still are indie and it's a new IP, so go ahead and go in there. So at this point, if I'm like, okay, I'm filling out my mystery section, these things, I don't think Outer Wilds counts as a murder mystery. It is a bit mysterious. But basically I have to get acquainted with a ton of games. So let's pretend that we're doing the mystery. If I were going to predict how much sales Lucifer Within Us might make, I'm going to look through Steam at all the mystery games and then get acquainted with that marketplace. So let's see, I'm going to open up a bunch of these and look at them and see, oh, what's this about? Okay, interesting. And I spent some time getting to know all of them. So this one's a multiplayer game. This one's not a mystery game. I have never heard of this. We were here together. This looks like it's an interesting adventure, but it's 3D. So it's possible, and Lucifer Within Us is also 3D, but it's more restricted 3D, not first person. It's possible that I'd want to restrict this to be even more similar. Maybe I want to look at isometric games. For example, Disco Elysium is an isometric mystery game of sorts, etc. And so I'd start filling out my spreadsheet. Now, there's a new thing that just came out a couple weeks ago by Lars Doucet, I think I'm pronouncing that correctly, where you can actually do this yourself. So he makes it very, very easy compared to how it used to be on Steam. So now, if I just look at Steam this way, I can much more easily see, oh, okay, if I want to see the highest ranked by critical reception, I can do this way, or the top sellers, I can do this way, or I can do the hidden gems, which are ones that are highly acclaimed but didn't sell very well. And each of these three categories is interesting. So from a market research standpoint, of course, you want to know how a game sells generally. And you can look into the game data crunch, how they calculate their performance, but it's basically based on review scores. The more reviews, the more sales is generally accepted, called the box leader number. And so the tricky thing about market research generally is it's very, very easy to only see the top sellers because stores like Steam, or any store really, doesn't really want to show you games that people aren't buying because you have a lower chance of buying them. It makes the store seem a bit wonky if they're showing unpopular products. So there's this natural tendency for things that are already selling well to sell even better. So it's okay to start filling out your market analysis with games that are selling extremely well, but it's important not to stop there. And that's why I really like the Game Data Crunch Hidden Gem score. When I look at this, I can see, ooh, this was probably a pretty good game. People generally liked this game, and yet it didn't sell very well. And that's curious, right? You want to look and see, what is it about this game that people liked, or what was it about this game that people just didn't buy? Is it that it's really good, it's just a fairly small niche? Or is it that there's a fundamental flaw with the game that makes it not, evangelized? Maybe it's really, really, really short, so people sort of end up forgetting about it because they're not playing it for very long. Or, there could be a lot of, or maybe their marketing campaign was just really not effective. And that's really hard to figure out later. Sometimes you'll find a really beautiful game and you'll wonder, why didn't anyone buy it? And that's the scariest thing. So after you've gone through the Game Data Crunch, or you've gone through Steam yourself, or whatever platform you're looking at, Steam is one of the easier ones because their data is more surfaced. Although I'm told you can get that data from consoles as well, and Game Data Crunch might look into doing that. But right, so in your market analysis, you're going to look at each of these categories, fill out this information, and then, hey, you can put whatever information you think is important to you. For me, I think that price And release year and reviews and reception and the average hours spent, I think those are all very relevant to understanding how a product is performing. I actually tend to not pay attention to release years that are too long ago. I think if it's more than 3 years ago, probably not very useful. The market has probably changed by then, especially for indies. Things happen really, really fast. One game can completely skew the market. In fact, now that it's been 3 years since I've made this spreadsheet, I'd be curious to know if Obra Dinn has made a big change in the market, because Lucas Pope is a very respected game designer, but also Obra Dinn was an amazingly crafted game that I'm sure lots of designers played and learned from. So it's possible that the mystery landscape is a little bit different. But anyway, so step 1, come up with the categories. Step 2, gather your information. Gather information about everything that's kind of relevant. So for us, that meant these categories and all these games. And at the end of it, okay, so now I have a spreadsheet. Now what do I do with it, right? This is the tricky, fuzzy part of market analysis, where we sort of can't be scientists, because I guess you could try to make a sheet, a scatter graph, and see certain lines and trends and things like that. But honestly, I think the human brain is really good at detecting patterns. And so really what you should be doing is really absorbing the data, take a couple of days, sleep on it, come back, and look for patterns that jump out at you. What are games, how are games doing? Even, especially the ones that you might not have heard of before you started doing this. What are the ones that are doing well? What are the ones that didn't do so well? It's surprisingly well, or surprisingly not so good. And with that information, how does your game compare? I actually genuinely start writing, I can't find that document now, but a little list of what are the risks with this project. Risks could include things like, oh, it's too similar to a game that's already very popular. Because at that point, those people, maybe they want another one. Maybe that's not a risk. Maybe it's great. Maybe people who really want more Sherlock Holmes will be very excited to have your game, but maybe they're already satisfied, and that's a question that you can answer for yourself. Maybe it's too similar to a game that's very popular, or maybe it's a game that's too different from genre expectations. So if you're making a battle royale, but it's single player, you have to ask yourself whether that's going to satisfy the people looking for the experience that you're offering. If your game says it's going to be one thing, but then it's missing part of what makes that thing interesting, then that's a very big risk, right? Some people might still connect with it, but you're putting an obstacle in their way. If you really can't place what is the genre, or what is the setting, or what is the core appeal of the game, or who will like this, like if they like this game, are they going to like your game? If you can't answer that very clearly and confidently, I think it's a huge risk, because it's still possible that there's, a blue ocean out there. There's tons of people waiting to love your game that didn't even realize it. But it's also possible that you've made a game nobody will understand. And so maybe your game will be ahead of its time. Maybe you'll make the game and then 10 years later, people will fall in love with it and it'll be a cult classic. Cult classics tend to be ahead of their time. Or it's possible you'll make something people just don't connect with and they don't understand, and then they don't buy it and they don't tell their friends about it, and so all your money was to make something beautiful, but ultimately you're not going to be able to break even on it, which is fine. If that's okay with you and your business model, that's great. Maybe you work on grants, or maybe you're making a non-commercial game, but this is market analysis, so you're going to understand how difficult it might be for you. So another risk is if you're looking at a genre where it tends to all be AAA games, or not even necessarily AAA, If you look at a genre like, let's say, action RPG, or MMO is a good example. If all of the ones that are selling well, if all of the ones that seem like they are selling enough that you'll make back your money are extremely expensive to make or extremely complicated to make, then that's a big risk you're taking, right? And it's not a marketing risk, it's a production risk. But it's something you might only be able to know within the context of market research, because once you look at the market landscape, you'll see that if you're a player in this genre, you just expect a certain level of polish. You expect a certain high resolution. You expect a certain performance quality. And as a small team, for Kitfox at least, that is a huge risk. If I'm making something and it looks like crap next to everything else that it's going to sit next to on the shelf, that's a very difficult sell for me to my customers. And finally, the difficult risk to assess is whether your audience is too niche. If you're making a game that that's in jokes between you and your brother, maybe those are very relatable. There are some sitcoms that, they seem personal and yet somehow everyone relates to them. And maybe your game's like that. But it's also possible that your game's target audience is just too small. If the ceiling of how many people maximum could possibly understand or connect to your game is, a few hundred people, what percentage of those people will buy the game? 10% of them? You're probably not going to make back your money. So these are all different factors that we use, trying to estimate realistically how many people might love it, what percentage of people might buy it, can we reach them? Reachability is actually another factor. If Kitfox was making a Goose Game, for example, the Untitled Goose Game, we would be scared. I was scared for them, to be honest, because honestly, the appeal felt mainstream, right? Which meant it could hit millions of people, but reaching the mainstream can be extremely difficult because they're not browsing Steam every day. They don't look in the stealth section of Steam, you know what I mean? And so it had to sort of get noticed by my mother-in-law and Vanity Fair and all these sorts of things in order for it to catch fire, I thought. And maybe I was wrong, but it seemed like a risk to me if I were going to make a casual, friendly game, a very accessible to the public game. Figuring out how to reach them is very difficult, whereas people who self-identify as gamers, you can say what you want about them. They have their culture problems, but they at least are out looking to buy new games. They are trying to find games that they love. They are hungry for more games. And so as a marketer, that's very exciting compared to somebody who plays maybe one game a year and mostly gets their recommendation from TV or something. So we'll go ahead and end it there. Maybe you'll have questions. Maybe I'll do a second round of this explanation if people like it. But yeah, I hope that you can do market research to calculate roughly how many people will buy your game. Oh, if you haven't heard of the box leader number, you take the review scores and you multiply it by, 10 if you're feeling very pessimistic, 20 if you're feeling reasonable, 50 or 100 if you're feeling very optimistic, and that's how many sales they got. So, for example, at this point in 2017, The Deed, which is apparently an RPG Maker game, exciting, they had 1,350 reviews. That suggests they had somewhere, 20 to 50 times more than that for sales. So that's going to be this. Let's see. I'm pretty pessimistic when I do my sales, so I'm just going to do times 20. So 27,000 copies, right? And 27,000 copies times whatever. What was their price? Their price was 60 cents. Really? Okay. Well, and then I do times half because of taxes and transfers and platform fees and et cetera, et cetera. So that looks like they only made $8,000. Maybe is it really 60 cents? I'm really curious. Was that a mistake on my part? No, it's 60 cents. So there you go. That's how they sold so many copies. But yeah, you can do that calculation for yourself. And keep in mind that that's, even, let's pretend that they sold it for I don't know, $4.99. Oh, now they're making $67,000. But at that point, it still would have been over the course of 2 years, right? So breaking even, often the calculation is less, will we break even? I mean, hopefully if you're being semi-realistic, yes, we can expect to break even. The question is when. Can you expect to break even in the first month if you do reasonably well? Or is it going to be the first year? Or are you hoping for 5 years? Because that's difficult. And the calculations for how much you're going to sell in the first week versus the first month, they seem to be fluctuating. But you can research yourself for that. Go to the Gray Alien Games blog, and Jake has done a lot of research into how games tend to sell over time. And hopefully he'll refresh that soon, although it's a little bit depressing every time he does. Okay, let's fix this. All right. Thank you very much. Good luck with your projects.